Good morning. It is Tuesday, April the 26th, and this is The Drill. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the daily declaration for spiritual warfare, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the Star-Spangled Banners, we will have no free lunch and Fort Wars. All that and more when I get back. Thank you. And now the daily declaration for spiritual warfare for April the 26th. Cast out the spirits of oppression. My son Jesus went about doing good and healing all those oppressed of the devil. Through his name I've given you the power to rebuke and cast out any spirit that would oppress you. Through that power you shall strip all power from any oppressing spirits. I will be your refuge from the oppressor and will deliver you from the wicked who surround you. I have established you in righteousness, and I will keep you far from oppression. I will not allow the enemy to take your inheritance from you through oppression. My child, you are my temple, my dwelling place, and I will encamp at my temple to guard it against marauding forces. Never again will an oppressor overrun my people, for now I am keeping watch. Acts chapter 10, verse 38, Isaiah chapter 54, verse 14, and Zechariah chapter 9, verse 8. Prayer declaration. Lord, you are my refuge from the oppressor. Deliver me from the wicked that would oppress me and from my deadly enemies that would surround me. I rebuke and cast out all spirits of oppression, sorrow, and anything attempting to bring me low in the name of Jesus. I am established in righteousness, and I am far from oppression. Amen. And that was the daily declaration for spiritual warfare for April the 26th. Thank you. What is the true conservative strategy for defeating socialists in this country? Number one, we must properly define conservatism. Then we must organize all potential conservatives under that definition. Once organized, we must dominate American culture. Dominating American culture means that we must rid ourselves of all the various cults the left has foisted upon us in this country. We rid ourselves of the left-wing cults by promoting value. What are the universal values? Number one, life. Number two, privacy. Number three, time. Number four, sanity. Number five, productivity. We defeat promiscuity by promoting family and privacy. Socialists must be driven from positions of power. And since it is lefty counterculture that provides the foundation for their political success, true conservatives must resist left-wing counterculture and promote normal American culture. By changing our culture, we will change our politics. And we change the culture by getting married, creating a family, and raising our children. Thank you. What are the tactics in support of the strategy to rid America of socialist influence? The long-term tactics are to be a true conservative, talk like a conservative, act like a conservative, dress like a conservative, think like a conservative. The short-term tactics are rhetorical. True conservatives need to win all of the arguments. True conservatives need to defeat the useful idiots on the left that populate their households, workplaces, and churches. That means don't be neutral. Don't try to prove a negative. Don't take their word for it, and ask lots of questions. The useful idiots are the people that simply repeat the latest talking points. Thank you. What are the true conservative political priorities? Number one, a constitutional amendment banning abortion throughout the country. Number two, make nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons obsolete. Number three, the immediate decertification of all public employee unions. Number four, the immediate assignment of criminal and civil liability to all government regulators. Number five, the immediate repeal of the so-called Patriot Act. Number six, the immediate repeal of all dictator laws. Number seven, the reinstatement of writs of outlawry. Number eight, government-sponsored recalls, ballot initiatives, and referendums. Number nine, a flexible minimum wage. Number 10, means-tested health care. And number 11, the immediate and permanent prohibition of investment banking by any office holder. Back in a minute. Thank you. What are the true conservative cultural priorities? Number one, bring back not-for-profit news. Number two, defeat the cult of promiscuity with the promotion of privacy. Number three, defeat the cult of neutrality with the effective use of propaganda. Number four, defeat the cult of personality by emphasizing character. Number five, defeat the cult of imagination, psychology, and Hollywood with religion and research. Number six, defeat the cult of reinvention by admitting one's mistakes. Number seven, defeat the cult of death, abortion, infanticide, and assisted suicide. Back in a minute. Thank you. The biggest mistakes that right-wing talk show hosts make. Number one, they are neutral. Number two, they fail to correct their mistakes. Three, they demoralize their audiences. Number four, they contradict themselves. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch, and this is the section on free trade. Trade protection accumulates upon a single point the good which it affects, while the evil inflicted is infused throughout the mass. The one strikes the eye at the first glance, while the other becomes perceptible only to close investigation." Unquote. Frederick Bastiat. Herein lies the rub on protectionism. The singular benefit to the single actor it creates is easily identifiable, but the broad and lasting damage it does to a host of actors requires further inquiry. This in no way makes the damage protectionism does any less potent. And that was, there's no free lunch. Thank you. And now is chapter 23 from the book Tales from My Bicentennial Year by Michael Buell, about a family growing up in the Adirondacks in New York, Adirondacks, and in basically, I guess, upstate New York. And chapter 22 was called Easter Miracle, and now we're on to chapter 23, which is called Fort Wars. The spring had been an incredible warm one. We had nice high temperatures and plenty of sun. Finally. All that sun and warmth made our woods grow real quick. Pretty soon vines and leaves and everything were all over the place. This made it great weather for building forts. Our little gang considered ourselves the big boys of the neighborhood. As such, we needed our fort to be away from the little kids. So we asked the moms permission to cross the ravine and build our fort. They didn't care. Just don't hurt yourselves, they said. With that permission, we were on our way to scout a place for the new fort. We walked deep into the woods. We got to the top of the ravine, and we all stood on the very top of the rock outlay and looked over the side of the ravine. It must have been a good 30 to 40 feet down to the bottom, with a small creek running along the bottom. Then it went right back up again to the other side. I started to go down, rather tentatively, I might add. I sure as heck did not want to fall. Huge Gene, on the other hand, went running down the side, jumping from rock to tree branches, catching his balance and starting off again. The rest of the gang bounded down after him. They all got to the bottom and looked up at me, holding on for dear life to a pine branch. "Come on down, you big wussy," yelled Huge Gene. So I rolled down and met up with them. The creek wasn't more than a foot or so deep, but it had a hard clay on the bottom that made it pretty slick going. It was only 8 feet wide or so. So we walked across and headed up the other side, climbing up, hanging onto rocks, and grabbing pine branches on the way. We reached the top and looked back over and then around. A little ways down was another smooth rock landing, so we headed there. Brad said that would make a good lookout. Behind the rock landing was 4 pine trees, almost in a perfect rectangle apart from each other, with nothing but small brush in between and around them. Big Russ ran over to them and said, "This is perfect. The 4 trees can be what we attach the walls to, and we can go from there." We had followed the same layout we did for last year's fort, only on a bigger scale. Brad had brought a small axe. This time we had permission. Mike C. brought a saw. I brought hammers and nails, and for some reason, Big Russ brought trash bags. Huge Gene brought, as he said it, my knowledge from Cub Scouts. Whatever, we said. So we went about figuring out how to do this. We began by chopping down small trees. Huge Gene and Brad would hack them down with the axe. Mike C. would saw off the small branches. Big Russ and I would lay the branches down on the sides of the 4 trees and nail the branches across for the walls. We had a pretty good system down. Within a few hours, we had all 4 walls up, just over our heads. Problem was, we had 4 walls, no windows or doors. So now we had to cut out the windows and a door and nail up support beams. Then we had to lay more branches across the top for the roof. Pretty soon we had a cool-looking fort. Big Russ came up with the idea of putting his trash bags on the top of the roof for shingles to keep the water out. After a few weeks of additions to the fort, we had an old carpet that Big Russ got from his basement for the floor, an old blanket from my house for the door, and candles from Mike C.'s house for light. And we had some old chairs from Huge Gene and Brad's house. And perhaps, most importantly, we had a few of Big Russ's dad's Playboy magazines. As we were banging around one Saturday, we thought we heard someone coming down what was now a nicely worn pathway. Brad darted for the lookout rock, laid down, and peered over the edge. Yep, no mistaking it. The dads were coming for an inspection. Big Mr. Tidwell, Mike C's dad, and mine were all making their way down the ravine. We all, at this point, were laying down on the lookout rock, watching them come up. They were actually having a good time, laughing it up. I thought for a moment, I bet they wish they had nothing better to do like us than play around in the woods without a care in the world. Big Russ jumped up and said in a loud whisper voice, "What the hell are we doing? The dads are coming, and we have to hide the playboys." Mike C's eyes bugged out, and he said, "Oh, shit, I wasn't supposed to take the candles." We all jumped up and ran like the dickens to our fort. Big Russ darted in and grabbed the playboys. Off he ran deep into the woods away from the fort. He just kept going. Mike C came out with the candles that he'd yanked out of the Coke bottles we had stuffed them into and started throwing them into the woods. The dads finally made it to the fort. You should have seen their eyes. I think for a few short minutes they were actually proud of us. My dad piped up first. "You boys built this thing by yourself? No help?" "Yes, we sure did," we all answered. "Pretty nice. Well built. Sturdy," bellowed Mr. Tidwell. "What the heck do you do down here all day?" asked Mike C's dad. "Nothing, just goofing around," we answered. Mike C's dad, Big John, leaned across under the blanket and into the doorway. "Why, Mike, do I smell candles?" he asked. None of us answered. "Pretty quiet around here," gruffed Mr. Tidwell. "Where's Big Russ?" asked my dad. "He's out looking for some moss to put in between the logs, just like we learned in Cub Scouts," Huge Gene piped up. Mr. Tidwell walked around the fort, poking at it, picking at it, lifting up the trash bag shingles. He then looked over at our pile of clay bombs we had been digging out of the creek. "What are you going to do with these?" he barked. "They're for Third Streeters. We heard they were building a fort just a little ways up, and we want to be ready for them," Brad proudly yelled up. "Look," Mr. Tidwell began his speech, "I'm telling you all right now, no bullshit down here. You hear me? No fires from candles, no one gets hurt, nothing stupid, or this circus will be shut down for good. Understand, rubber band?" he yelled to all of us. We all shook our heads that we understood and promised no bullshit, although we didn't say bullshit. The other dad smiled and laughed and started heading back. We had made it through our inspection. Big Russ raised his head up from the bushes and smiled, holding his stack of playboys. Over the course of the last few weekends, building this thing up and stockpiling dirt bombs, we were just waiting for the attack from the Third Streeters. You see, our intelligence had learned that the moron Third Streeters were building a fort bigger and better than ours just a ways up, more towards 3rd Street, and that they were going to take ours out. We decided to take matters into our own hands. "No sense waiting around to be attacked," Huge Gene said. So we decided to go on a little recon. We all stockpiled our clay bombs into our knapsacks and headed out. We felt like John Wayne and his men looking for the enemy in their war movies. We were darting between trees, lying down in bushes, and trying not to be seen on our way up to the Third Streeters' fort. As we got closer to where we thought it would be, we crawled on our bellies under the bushes. And then it came into sight. It was bigger than ours, almost twice the size. Pretty much looked the same, although it had a real door on it. They even had clear plastic covering the windows. "Heck, you could live in that thing," Big Russ Whisper yelled to us. And as we sat there watching them farting around, we saw the coolest thing. They had a rope swing. One of them, probably that good-for-nothing squirmy Bobby Donlin, had shimmied up a pine tree that was sort of leaning over the ravine and tied a huge rope on a branch. The rope had a big loop on the bottom. They would put their foot in the loop and swing out over the ravine, some 30 or 40 feet in the air, and then back again, jumping into the side of the ravine and climbing up. It looked pretty cool. Huge Gene had enough of us lying in the bushes. He motioned for us to come to him, and we all crawled back over on our bellies to him. He whispered to us his plan. He wanted me to crawl behind the fort, Big Russ to sneak over the far side of the fort, Mike C. and Brad to stay on this side of the fort, and Huge Gene would scurry down the ravine and make his way up, but off to the side. When Huge Gene gave the signal, which was him trying to sound like a bird, kee-caw, we were all to charge the fort throwing the clay bombs, totally surrounding them and taking them by surprise. We all got in place, amazingly without arousing any attention. I had been there a while, laying the bushes, trying to remain undetected, and waiting for the others to get into place. I moved a bush branch real slowly so I could get a better look, and there was Bobby Donlin, coming around from the front side of the fort, walking straight towards me. I was sure I was spotted. He walked nearer to me. He looked around, scanned the back of the fort, and then proceeded to walk right past me and my bush. He walked up to a tree and took a leak, zipped himself back up, and walked right by me. As he was making his way back, I heard the signal, kee-caw, kee-caw. I jumped up and started yelling like an Indian. I immediately started hurling clay bombs at Bobby Donlin's head. He turned around, stunned to see me. One of my clay bombs hit him right upside his head. "You shit," he screamed. "Fourth Streeters are here." I saw Big Russ charge in from the side, pelting Chris Fartwell in the gut with his ammo. Chris clenched his gut and fell over. Brad and Mike C. came charging onto the scene from the other side. I saw a TJ belly button picker jump through the plastic-covered window on the side of the fort. The Third Streeters, taking commands from Bobby, who was yelling, "Retreat, retreat down the ravine," started running towards the ravine. All of us chasing them, hurling the clay bombs at them all. It was great. As they reached the top of the ravine, Bobby Donlin jumped onto the rope swing and went sailing over the entire ravine. Huge Gene popped up and started nailing him with clay bombs as he was suspended overhead. Back in a minute. Thank you. Bobby must have had a ton of speed and adrenaline going because he sailed all the way over the ravine and jumped to the other side. I didn't think that was possible. From that side, he started throwing anything he could back at us. The other three Third Streeters came charging down the ravine and almost ran over Huge Gene in their attempt to escape the onslaught of ammo pelting them. They plunged into the water and up the other side. Mike C., so caught up in the excitement of our rout and seeing Bobby jump the ravine, ran and jumped onto the rope swing, yelling, "Charge the retreating bastards!" Mike C. got just about directly over the water, some 30 feet up, and was hit dead on with what looked like a tree branch. From there, all went into slow motion. Brad, Big Russ, and I continued to rain ammo down on the Third Streeters, but we stopped right at the top of the ravine. Huge Gene was coming back up the ravine to us, turning around, throwing his clay hand grenades back towards the Third Streeters. Mike C., meanwhile, had caught the tree branch right upside the head, right over the water on the rope swing. We all stopped and watched him in slow motion fall off the swing and drop straight down towards the creek. Unfortunately, his head was leading the way down. I saw him extend his arm to try and break the fall, and then smack. He hit the water like a dropped watermelon. The Third Streeters, of course, turned and ran away. Clay bomb fight was one thing. Being around to catch blame for actually injuring someone was another. They fled, and I couldn't blame them. Heck, we all wanted to run away, but it was Mike C. We all ran down to the creek as fast as we could. Huge Gene practically dove down the side of it. Huge Gene pulled Mike C. up out of the water and hiked him up onto his lap. Mike C. could not breathe for a few minutes. "Relax, Mike. It's just the wind knocked out of you. Try and breathe. Just a little bit of air. You can do it," Big Russ coached Mike C. Mike C., now soaking wet, at least could breathe, but he was blubbering something fierce now. He went to rub his eyes, but he couldn't lift his right arm. He was screaming. We looked down at his arm, and below his elbow, instead of being straight, was now at a 45-degree angle. "It's broke," I yelled. "Now we're screwed," yelled Brad. "Yep, you can't hide this," said Huge Gene. Okay, here's the story. We were just minding our own business, hiking through the woods, when old Mike here slipped and fell on some moss and tumbled down the ravine. "You boys got that?" yelled Big Russ. And that was the story, however unbelievable it was. We all carried and walked Mike C. back to 4th Street. At every turn or bump, Mike C. was howling in pain, blubbering like a damn fool. But he did have a broken arm and was now forced to climb up a ravine, trudge through woods, and in a few moments face Big John. We approached his house, all of us coaching him to stop crying. It couldn't hurt that much. Suck it up, as we told him. We relentlessly told him the story to make sure he had it. Mike C.'s parents, Big John and Brad, must have had good ears, or Mike C. was crying pretty loud because Big John came out of the house bounding down the stairs, running at us before we even came out of the woods. Amazingly enough, he didn't yell at us. He shouted, "You boys get the hell home." He picked up Mike C. and ran him to the house. 2 seconds later, he and Brad and Mike were out of the house, jumping into the car. They sped away to the hospital. Now the Inquisition would begin, and it did, in earnest. Needless to say, Mike C. cracked and spilled the beans, which would not have been so bad if we all spilled them first. Instead of telling the slipped on moss story, Mike C. claims he slipped up while under the anesthesia the doctor gave him. Mike C. now had to go the whole beginning of the summer with a cast on his arm. Our dads went down the next day and destroyed the forts. So we were off to a great start that summer. And that was chapter 23, The Fort Wars, from the book Tales from My Bicentennial Year by Mike Buell, story of a family living in Gansevoort, New York in the Adirondacks in 1975. And next time, chapter 24, Yankee Stadium. Back in a minute. Thank you. Who is the socialist? He is the man that is spiritual. He's the man that seeks consensus. He's subjective, petty, and small, taking everything in life personally. He's outrageous, boring, and rude. He pretends to be a leader and a change agent. He pretends that he's your friend. He is sly, cunning, and deceptive. He dresses, acts, and speaks like a slob. He is informal and terminally unique. He is childish and pretends that he knows nothing. He has no conscience and pretends that might makes right and that the ends justify the means. He is impulsive and rationalizes his behavior. He is deterministic, blaming others for his mistakes. He is skeptical, demanding that others solve his problems. His unreasonableness and irresponsibility make him a bad role model, bad father, brother, family member, friend, and a bad person, period. So if you think that you can be friends with a socialist, think again. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers, and reminding you to listen to the John and Ken Show on KFI AM 640, Monday through Friday from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Pacific Time. Also, KFI needs to bring back Brian Suits and his show, The Dark Secret Place. Hashtag bring back Brian Suits. Until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.